What's up, y'all? My name is Josh, and this is...
What's up, y'all? It's Bree here.
Yes, and we're so excited to dive right into this episode. We're in a series that we're calling Triggered, and in this episode, we're talking about where we go when we compare. Where do we go when we compare, when we're triggered by something? Brianna is super comfortable right now. She is all up in the space. You comfortable?
We're one.
Yeah, we won, but we can be one comfortable couple together in our zones right here. All right? Are you ready for this episode?
Yes, I'm very comfortable.
With
my Christmas socks.
What comes to mind when you hear the word comparison?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is just this reality of we are always comparing ourselves, whether it's unintentionally or intentionally. We tend to do it.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. So to set us up, I want to set us up with a story a little bit. So as we've just been navigating the past few years, right?
Yes.
And being married and doing all the things, I feel like as just in normal fashion, we kind of, whenever we get to explore whether or not we're going to do something like this, have a conversation that we record and just have for others to listen, we start talking about what has stood out to us. And I think one of the things that resonated with me when we started talking about that was just this idea of social media. So I remember probably like last year when I was speaking at Table, I was given a message, and then I said in that message, I was talking about social media. And in that message, I was talking about how on my social media at one point in time, I had people following me, but I was following nobody.
Yeah. And to give context, the Table is for our young adults at First Orlando.
Yep. Young adults, First Orlando. So I had people following me, but I had no one, but I was following no one. And I remember that at times people would look at me like I was just this arrogant person that just wanted people to follow him, but wouldn't follow people back. And I didn't say anything. I just let it be what it was. But I was telling them in reality the situation is I had understood that I can be a very...
Sorry.
I can be... Go ahead, get comfortable. You get comfortable. It's your space. It's you get in your zone. I can be a very competitive person, right? I can be a very competitive person. I think sometimes when I see things, it will trigger me to want to go and do more and make more progress and do all these things. So I realized very early on when it came to social media, I just was not going to follow anybody because I didn't want to have to deal with or wrestle with the idea of trying to be triggered every time I seen somebody doing something. And I was just like, you know what, I'm just not going to do that. So, but I didn't really vocalize that. I just that was just the path, and that was just kind of what I did. But I think in that vein, I think at times that using social media as the domain of discourse for this conversation, but we could be triggered by comparison in many other different ways. But have you ever seen yourself triggered by social media?
Oh, yeah, like 1,000%. I feel like especially the longer we've been married, life is just lifing, and sometimes we want things. Well, I want things that we haven't gotten there yet. And so for me, it's easy for me to get triggered by social media. So even I'll do this thing where I'm like, man, you know what? I'm a fast. I'm not going to do social media. I'll be fine, friends, until I hop on there just one day because I say, you know what, Lord, I can handle it. And I'm typically okay until I start like scrolling. Then your girl just be
gone
out of it
with the wind,
upset,
out of here
for no reason.
None.
Yes.
It be wild, y'all. It be wild. I wonder if any of y'all have felt that way also, right? It was just like you get caught up by and you don't want to. You're just minding your own business. You're going about your day, and bang, it just hits you, and it just makes you feel a type of way. And today what we want to do is we want to look at how we can be reacting when we're triggered and how we can be responding when we're triggered. So when it comes to comparison, when we're navigating, we're going to look at what it looks like to react to something that we're triggered by when we're comparing ourselves to others, whether it's on social media or somewhere else. And I think two things come to my mind when I think about this. I think of envy and I think of jealousy, right? I think of envy in jealousy. And because I feel like oftentimes those are some of the thoughts that come up in my mind as I wrestle through that.
Well, and I think too, just in this little moment, I had a revelation in terms of like, I always think of envy as like, envy is the first response, and then jealousy, like, sometimes it happens, but I always clump them two together in a sense, even though I know they're different terms.
Well, I never knew the difference between them. I think I would interchangeably use them all the time.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I want to define them, and I'm going to use Brene Brown definitions for the sake of this conversation
Celestins
here.
love Brene
I thought this
Brown.
was helpful. Envy it occurs when we want something that another person has. Envy occurs when we want something that another person has. Jealousy is when we fear losing a relationship or a valued part of a relationship that we already have. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to envy, I hear, man, someone has something that I want, or someone is experiencing something that I want to experience. And when I think about jealousy, I just naturally think about relationships, friendships, people are gathering, or they just have better relationships with each other versus our relationships together. So
yeah,
I break it apart like that.
I think when I heard this was like a mind blown moment for me, because I think I realized that a lot of times when I would be triggered by something and I would be reacting to something, I would think that it was jealousy, but it's actually envy.
Yeah.
Right? It's actually, oh man, I want that thing, or oh man, I would like to be doing that, or whatever case may be. But it was envy that was triggered in me, not jealousy. And I think just the subtle shift in even just understanding what we're actually feeling, so that we know how to respond to what it is that we're feeling, because those are two totally different things, right?
Yeah.
Envy is all about wanting something that you don't have. Jealousy has more to do with the relationship and the triangulation of the relationship and fear of losing part of that relationship, right? So it matters to get these terms correct, right? But those are kind of two ways that we can be reacting to comparing, right? So those two ways, and I feel like if we don't deal with those two ways, I think there's other ways that we can be reacting to comparison, but I think those are two that kind of stood out to us the most. And I think if we don't deal with those in the right way, it can cause trouble, right? It can ultimately breed resentment, right? How would you define resentment?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I think I would define resentment as, this is something that I'm holding on to. There's this experience that I had, or something that I've been carrying for a while, and I just can't let it go.
Yeah.
That's how I would define
resentment. When I think of resentment, I think of not saying what I wanted to say, or not acknowledging what I wanted to acknowledge, and now there's a low level fester in my spirit when it comes to either the person or the thing, and it's brewing, and it never produces positive fruit.
It's like the volcano before it erupts.
Volcano before it erupts. Why do you know so much about the volcano before it erupts?
Listen, don't be telling my business to these people.
I didn't say the conviction of the Lord.
I just have these moments where I just feel like I can just be silent for so long, and then your girl be mad, and then it just be coming out.
It be coming out. But I think, yes, I feel like in our marriage a lot of times, and I don't think that you've got like super, I don't think like you've erupted, but I think my fear has always been that like you can play it off. I feel like I can tell something to Bree, and Bree will just be like, and I think that we good, but it could mean something completely different. So I know multiple times in our relationship where I just be like, hey man, I'd rather you just tell me the thing so we can conflict it, than for it to like build some deep resentment in there, right?
And I have gotten better.
You have.
And I think the only reason why I've gotten better is because I think you've provided a space in telling me like, hey, just let me know whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
And I think me speaking for me personally growing up, I don't think I had that space. So I was so comfortable with just being like, you know what? I'm going to see how much I can hold.
Yeah. No, it's real. So I think when it comes to comparison and when we're triggered, I think some of the primary ways that we can react is through envy or through jealousy. I think when we start to feel that, we want to start to deal with that, right? We want to start to deal with that. Or I believe that it'll kind of turn and fester into some type of resentment, which is not going to breed anything positive. So what does it look like to deal with that? How do we actually do that? What are some steps that we can actually, instead of react to what we're feeling, respond to what we're feeling? And that's what we're going to continue the conversation in.
Yeah.
And what would you say is one way that we can practically respond to being triggered as opposed to reacting?
Yeah, I think in my moments of trying to be silent for too long, I think something that I have noticed when I'm silent and I can keep it together is that I just accept how I feel. I accept the situation for what it is. Let me not say the situation. I accept how I feel when I am sensing that I'm comparing myself to other people. And I think, in doing that, that is better than being in denial. So then that makes me spiral even more, because I'm not only in denial about the situation, but I'm just like, bro, I'm gonna keep scrolling and I'm keep being mad, really upset.
What does it look like for you to practically accept something?
You know what? I think it could have been you, probably was you, or even my counselor. But I think for me, when it comes to accept, I think it's vocalizing how I'm feeling. So vocalizing the emotion that's attached with how I'm feeling. Your girl don't like to sit in anger, but for the last few months, I've just been angry about things for whatever reason, and that could be a part of, just life in general and some things that have been happening with us and family stuff. But I think I just was told, like, hey, Bree, like, you just have to accept what it is and you have to be okay with sitting in it. And I think oftentimes we try to move past our emotions instead of sitting in them.
No, that's good. I think that's good. I think accepting, I think that's very practical. I think what it looks like for me to accept is like whatever the thing is. I don't think I always get there, but if my mood shifts enough to where Bree recognizes and she asks me what's wrong, I think I will just acknowledge whatever it is that I saw and kind of just acknowledge what it made me feel and kind of leave it at that. Like I'm not looking for you to fix it. I'm not looking for you to feel sorry for me. I'm not looking for you to anything. I'm just looking to acknowledge it for myself of like, hey man, I saw this, it made me feel that. And I'm getting there. I'm trying to get on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes too, I think when it comes to accepting, like, bro, like sometimes you just don't even be realizing. Well, I don't. But I will say when I have moments where I feel like my mood has shifted in general, where I'm like, oh man, like I'm really happy. And now I'm like, bro, like why am I all of a sudden sad and don't want to talk and want to isolate? And I think even that is in the form of like, I've just accepted that there's been this shift. So I've addressed it.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we can do in response to being triggered by either comparing and whatever the case may be, is just by accepting where it is, like acknowledging the feeling that we may be feeling, right? Feelings aren't facts, but we do want to acknowledge what that is so that we can start to move through that. And I think that's the next piece of what I'm talking about is just the acknowledging of that reality. I think it's the choosing reality is what I start to tell myself of just like, hey man, I know that this may be what I want, or this may be where I want to go, or this might look cool, or this might whatever. But right now, this is where I really am. As I choose to acknowledge that, there's a level of grieving that has to come into that of like, hey man, this is what reality is. I'm going to choose reality and take the next step forward to try to continue to make it to wherever it is that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. So I'll ask you the question. So for you, how have you handled just grief and navigating grief, specifically, in this season of your life?
I think for me, I think grieving has been a thing for the last few years that I've been navigating, and not in the sense of like grieving. I think when people think of grieving, I think, well, at least for me, when I think of grieving, I think funeral. But I'm not talking that grief. I think that I think that is also grieving, but I think that there is a more practical grief that we navigate when we don't get what we want.
Yeah, which we'll probably talk about that a little bit more in the next.
Yeah, we'll talk more about expectations and things. But I think for me, practically, grieving looks like just accepting the reality of what is in that moment, being able to communicate my either frustration or wherever it is that I'm at with that in that moment,
Yeah.
and just identifying like whatever, if this is something that I continue to want, what can I do? What is my next step? What is God telling me to do next on that journey? Or if it's something that just is outside of my reach or probably that I'm not going to get, it's literally just a waiting game for the feeling to subside, and I'll move on to the next thing. I'll just be honest with you. I don't think there's a secret science to it, but I think what I'm realizing is that, like, I used to look grieving as this big thing, and I think that it can be bigger. I think grief can look different in different situations, but I feel like grief is like a daily ritual of certain things that one needs to learn how to do.
Yeah. No, I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel that.
So go ahead.
No. I think I was just going to say, for me, because you mentioned, like, grieving doesn't always have to be, like, a negative in terms of, like, funerals and things like that. But I think I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about a little bit about grieving and touching on the reality of that. Grieving is actually okay. Like, we need to grieve really to know that we still have emotions that we need to feel, if that makes sense. So I think grief can be such a negative thing, but there is, I'm not going to say all positivity to it, but there is a positive aspect to it, because when we grieve, we have to accept where we are.
Yeah. And I think in the vein of that also, it's the not judging yourself for grieving, right? I think it's the at times we can judge ourselves for the thing that we're feeling and make it even harder. It's not even about the thing that we're navigating now. It's about us judging ourselves for how we're responding to or the fact that we have to grieve whatever said situation. So it's wild. It's wild. So we talked a little bit about being triggered and where we go when we start to compare, and how envy and jealousy can start to breed resentment if we don't take care of that. And then we looked at how we can start practically responding instead of reacting to that, right? And we talked about how we can be accepting, how we can acknowledge, and what grief, what it looks like to grieve during that process. As we kind of start to land a plane here, what would be your thought to somebody that's listening to this, watching this, and maybe going through a season of feeling like they are being poked and prodded and triggered by certain things? What would be your encouragement to them?
Yeah, I think encouragement is comparison is a thing, whether we like it or not. I think the real question is, how do you respond to it? And I think also recognizing that it's okay to realize that you are comparing yourself, but not let it dictate how you move and moods and things like that.
Yeah. I think I would say not to judge yourself for your reactions or your responses, right? I think giving yourself grace and let the reaction be what the reaction is, but from that point, taking it and finding a way to respond properly. You can't beat yourself up for how you react to something, especially when it's a physiological response to something. Like, it is what it is. Like, you're going to react how you're going to react at times, but like, let's get past my encouragement is to try to get past the reacting to what is the proper response. How can I now start to respond to this? And if this seems to continue to trigger me, how can I build systems around this to where it won't trigger me as well, or I know the proper response to when I start to get triggered?
Yeah, and I'll say too, having a safe space or safe people to process when you do feel like you are comparing yourself. People that can smack some reality into you, but also kind of send you back towards Jesus and be like, hey, have you talked to him about this? Or there are some insecurities, some things that you need to work through. Maybe that's the reason why you're comparing yourself and not the reality of, like, you actually want what they have.
Yep. Well, my name is Josh, and this is...
Oh, I'm Bree, friends.
Yes, and we are so excited that you had a chance to hang out with us during this episode. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.